welcome to the Communist Manifesto for Personal Finance, the only program that teaches you how to save your means of production. I'm Comrade Burke.
Whether it's the viruses my comrades in China send over, or something really scary like climate change, it's important to be prepared for the worst. When will our elected officials learn this lesson? Probably never. But even if the federal government never plans for an emergency, you can. Now, I'm assuming you are all sane, rational people who would never panic during a crisis. So using
logic
and
reason,
you can probably guess the item you must absolutely have in an emergency.
Bottled water?
No.
Paper towels?
No.
1,000 rolls of toilet paper?
No. Why would you ever buy 1,000 rolls of toilet paper at once?
In case I run out.
Motherfucker, you are a 9-inch tall bunny. How big of a are you planning to take?
Well, I am a hand puppet.
What does that mean?
It means I have a gaping ass.
We're getting off track. If we take a moment and think about this more than not at all, we'll realize the most important thing is...
Should I buy a gun?
Okay, I see what the problem is. Most of us think emergency planning is the same as
doomsday prepping.
It is not. Emergency planning is preparing for something plausible. For example, you need critical dental surgery, but your insurance won't cover the cost. Or the greedy capitalist pigs who run your company lay you off so they can get a bigger bonus. Doomsday prepping is preparing for a cataclysmic event that is extremely unlikely, like the Yellowstone volcano erupting. Or M. Night Shyamalan making The Happening 2. Even before the coronavirus, people took doomsday prepping to the extreme. They spent thousands of dollars they didn't have on canned food and firearms. Why? Well, we think some people want the apocalypse to happen. And as communists, we understand secretly wishing everything would go to shit. After all, that's the only time communism is popular. But as much as we all fantasize about the end of days, the fact is, doomsday prepping is worthless. Because you're not an idiot, you know you can't survive the total collapse of society just by hoarding bottled water and purchasing a crossbow from a sporting goods store. But as things get scarier every day, your emotions take over the rational part of your brain. When you're scared, you're tempted to run to the nearest grocery store and buy all the flour you can carry, even though you've never baked anything in your life. So in order to dissuade you from panic purchasing a gas generator you don't know how to use, we'll meet you at your level. For the first time, we at the CMPF present...
Hello, and welcome to the Communist Manifesto for Doomsday Prepping, the only show that teaches you how to survive the end of days. I'm Comorden Joe. Frequently, I'm asked by my slaves, how did I rise to power? What was the essential resource that allowed me to conquer the wasteland? Well, it wasn't guzzoline, and it wasn't bullets. It was...
money.
Money?
Yes. Money. Lots of money. You see, before the war pigs killed the world, I used money to buy everything necessary to survive. And I'm not talking about 50 cans of baked beans and a katana from a Ren fair. I'm talking about things you actually need. Things like...
Number 1. Arable land.
With money, I purchased acres of fertile land. This land provided crops, and the crops provided
seeds.
Thus, I had a food source that was renewable. This property also had its own...
Number 2. Fresh water source.
In order to live, a human being needs to drink one of these every day. For a family of 4 to survive for just 1 year, they would need to consume 1,500 gallons of water, or roughly enough water to fill a minivan. If you live in an urban area, your only water source comes from the city. When society collapses, this water will be gone. Can you store enough water in your apartment to last a year? 5 years? A decade? Because you're not an idiot, you realize buying and storing thousands of gallons of bottled water is not a viable solution. The only logical choice is to use
money
to purchase land with its own source of fresh water. Water that won't go away when the bombs fall. Of course, having fresh water in crops will make you a target for bandits, so you'll also need a...
Number 3. Defensible shelter.
In order to protect all of my natural resources and wives, I needed a means to defend myself. And yes, for all you gun-loving comrades in the Socialist Rifle Association, I needed to have firearms. But, more importantly, I needed a shelter I could easily defend. Luckily, I had enough
Money.
to construct a fortress from which I could fight off gangs of raiders many times my number. So, my war boys, if you are serious about surviving the apocalypse, acquire enough
Money.
to purchase land with its own water source and where you can construct a concrete bunker. Anything less is pointless.
But I don't have enough money to afford any of those things.
Then I guess when the apocalypse happens, you are
If you have questions, comments, or pleas for mercy, witness us, or follow us to the gates of Valhalla, where we will meet you shiny and chrome.
Thank you, Communist Joe. What a lovely guy. And he's right. Whether you're planning for an emergency or doomsday prepping, the most valuable resource is
Money.
So where should you put your emergency money? Well, in an
Emergency fund.
An emergency fund is a reserve of cash you keep for when the proverbial feces hits the fan. It must be
Number 1, secure.
and.
Number 2, easily accessible.
So for the love of Marx, please don't put your emergency fund in the stock market.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Do you?
You're saying I should buy a bunch of gold and hide it in my apartment.
No.
But gold is money.
Gold is a liability. Okay, if you're a billionaire with your own private compound in Montana, maybe you want a reserve of gold on the 2% chance all currency becomes worthless. But if you're a working class proletariat living in New York, you don't want a bunch of gold hidden around your apartment because there's a 98% chance someone will steal it. And if your gold isn't insured, well, Communist Joe puts it best.
You are
Thanks, Communist Joe. Point is, because you're not an idiot, you know it is a very bad idea to have large amounts of money hidden around your home. You want to keep your money where it is safe and, more importantly, federally insured. Someplace like a savings account in a
Credit union.
or
Bank.
Well, how do I create my emergency fund?
the best way to start building your emergency fund is to use our old friend.
The skim.
For those of you who haven't watched our episode on budgets or need a little refresher,
The skim.
has 3 basic steps.
Number 1, decide what percentage of your income you want to save. Number 2, when paid, immediately put that amount into savings. Number 3, spend the rest.
The skim is the simplest method for building your emergency fund, and with automation, the easiest. Assuming your financial institution has its own website, you can go online and set up a recurring deposit into your savings account. Then, you don't have to worry about contributing to your emergency fund. A computer does it for you. But how long should a computer do it for you? Well, to answer that question, we have to answer this question.
How big should your emergency fund be?
When building your emergency fund, your first goal is to save.
$1,000.
Why? Because in 2019, only 42% of Americans had at least.
$1,000.
So, if you save,
$1,000.
you're doing better than over half of America. Boy, that's really depressing to say out loud. Should you save more than $1,000? Yes. Yes, you should. We recommend having an emergency fund large enough to cover 3 months' worth of expenses. Now, again, if you watched our episode on budgets, you're ahead of the curve. Because in that episode, we asked you to keep track of your spending for 3 months. So you should already know how much money to put into your emergency fund. I mean, of course, there's the possibility that you just ignored our advice because, hey, what were the odds that a global catastrophe would cause a financial meltdown and force you to think about your finances, right? So if you're someone who didn't watch our episode on budgets or couldn't be bothered to track your spending for 3 months, why don't you pause this video and do that? We'll take a quick ad break.
Have you been furloughed or laid off? Are you getting flooded with bills that you can't pay? Are you suffering from a sense of despair because you're about to run out of food?
Hi, I'm Comrade Rourke, the host of the Communist Manifesto for Personal Finance, the most watched show with that name. I'm here to tell you about an exciting program that has been tried before and has failed before, but we promise we'll definitely get it right this time. Of course, I'm talking about communism. As you've probably guessed by now, we are in the depths of
Great Recession 2, Electric Boogaloo.
and I'm sure many of you are very afraid. Who better to tell you how to live in a state of constant fear than a communist? With our program, we'll teach you everything you need to know about living under the crushing weight of existential dread. For example, do you have cancer? Well, in communist countries, you don't need to pay for expensive radiation treatment. There's literally tons of radioactive material in the atmosphere. Just take a deep breath and cancer will go away. If simply breathing isn't enough, look for radioactive graphite lying around. When you find some, rub it on your tumor. Does this make the cancer go away? It sure does. Why? Because we say it does. Unable to afford the necessary protein and carbohydrates to nourish your family, when you become a communist, you'll automatically learn the recipe for wallpaper soup, a meal first made in the city of Leningrad. Basically, you simmer wallpaper in a pot of water for a day or two until you get a thin gruel. This soup is perfect for barely keeping you alive. If you have any lying around, feel free to throw in some scrumptious leather shoes. Now that is almost edible. By now, some of you are asking, how do people live like this? The answer is alcoholism. Speaking of things that are sad, unable to buy presents for your children this year? Instead of recycling those vodka bottles, why not give them as gifts this winter solstice? Then your children can play the national sport of every communist country, throwing empty bottles at abandoned buildings. Of course, if you want to give your children a radical present, sign them up for the Red Army. We'll take anyone who looks 12 or older, and every recruit gets a brand new Kalashnikov. So if you're feeling scared or angry about the state of the world, become a communist today. Because you know what they say, 30th time's the charm. And remember, one day we'll look back on all of this and laugh. Welcome back. Hopefully you figured out how much money you need to cover 3 months worth of expenses. Ideally, this is how much you should put into your emergency fund. Of course, if you're feeling paranoid about the state of the world, and who isn't these days, you're more than welcome to save up to 6 months worth of expenses. After all, you may have to rely on your emergency fund for a long time.
Well then, shouldn't I put all of my money into the bank? I mean, my emergency fund can't be too big, right?
Actually, yes it can.
Why?
Because if you put too much money into your emergency fund, you fall victim to
Opportunity cost.
Opportunity cost?
opportunity cost is the loss of potential gain from other alternatives when one alternative is chosen. Understand?
No.
Basically, it's the price you pay for making a bad decision. Let's look at an example. At the beginning of the coronavirus epidemic, a lot of countries were caught off guard. But one nation maintained its composure and took steps to not only control COVID-19, but also keep their economy running. Of course, I'm talking about the most perfect of all countries. First to discover the wheel and land on Mars, winner of all Olympic Games, and killer of the dinosaurs, North Korea. What? South Korea? Oh, Marx, damn it. At the beginning of the coronavirus epidemic, the South Korean government leapt into action. Realizing they were facing a lethal virus no one was immune to, they began mass testing the population. With data from the mass testing, South Koreans precisely located the infected regions and quarantined those areas. Thus, they were able to control the virus without shutting down large sections of their economy. Now, how did the US government respond to the crisis?
5 military coups later.
Not well. Like South Korea, the US saw its first case of COVID-19 in January 2020. Unlike South Korea, the US government did not respond quickly or logically. Instead of producing millions of tests and investing resources into tracking the virus, the federal government did nothing for over a month. When it finally acted, it was too late. By March, the virus had grown out of control because of
exponential growth, destroyer of worlds.
And everyone started to
Panic.
With no system of mass testing, public health officials had no way of knowing who had the virus or where it was going. And as hospitals became overwhelmed, governors shut down their states' economies in order to flatten the curve. Hopefully, you see how
opportunity cost
applies to this situation. When given the chance, South Korea seized the opportunity to control the virus during its early stages. Thus, they were able to keep their economy running. The U.S. government did not seize the opportunity, and it cost us dearly. As of this recording, we have the highest number of COVID cases of any nation. We also have mass unemployment to the point where Congress passed a stimulus bill of $2.3 trillion and counting. If nothing else, let this pandemic be a teachable moment for you kids looking to pursue a career in government. $1 billion in prevention is worth $1 trillion in cure. So what is the
opportunity cost
of making your emergency fund too big? Well, to explain that, we have to visit our old acquaintance, annual percentage rate. When you put money into a savings account, you do earn interest over time. But before you pop that champagne, you should know that the average annual yield of a savings account is
0.01%.
Did you say 1%?
No, I said
0.01%.
Which means if you had $1,000 in your savings account over a year, you would earn a dime. Let's compare this to the annual yield of the stock market, which historically has grown at an average rate of
7%.
So, if you had $1,000 in the stock account over a year, you'd expect to earn 700 dimes. And because of our old frenemy,
compound interest, creator of wealth,
money in the stock market should grow exponentially faster than any money you put into a bank account. The difference is so great, some people actually forgo an emergency fund and put all of their money in stocks. Now, we communists can't control where you put your money, yet. But we strongly recommend that you have some form of emergency fund, ideally enough to cover
3 to 6 months
worth of expenses, or at the very minimum,
$1,000.
Because your emergency fund is what protects your retirement. Think of it as a shield you use to defend yourself from the numerous financial crises brought on by late-stage capitalism. Or, for you geopolitical nerds out there, think of your emergency fund as a buffer state. A buffer state is territory you liberate and then occupy in order to have a nice defensible zone between you and the Western imperialist pigs. In other words, your emergency fund is like Poland. Over the long run, it will take a beating. So now that we know how big your emergency fund should be, we still have to answer the most important question. What is an emergency? This is something we really can't define because everyone's idea of an emergency is different. So instead, we're going to play a game called
Is This an Emergency?
In this game, we'll run down a list of scenarios and decide whether they are or are not emergencies. Scenario 1. Your college friends decide to have a reunion in Barcelona. Should you use your emergency fund to buy plane tickets? Fun vacations to Europe are not an emergency. Also, you probably should avoid traveling to Spain for a while. Scenario 2. A close relative is very sick and on the verge of death, and airlines don't offer bereavement fare because airlines are terrible. Is this an emergency? Unlike old monuments in Europe, your loved ones might not be around your whole life. Scenario 3. You need your car to get to work, but the brake pads are almost gone. Should you use your emergency fund to replace them? You should definitely replace your brake pads. They're much cheaper than replacing your car after you T-bone another vehicle. Scenario 4. You have a boring car, so you think it is a good idea to get a whip-ass spoiler because YOLO. Is this an emergency? Just because you put a spoiler on a Ford Taurus doesn't mean it's not a Ford Taurus. Also, Travis, no one said YOLO in 10 years. You're 42, get your life together. Scenario 5. Your new job requires you to be on your feet all day. You need a good pair of shoes for support. But good shoes are expensive. Is this an emergency? Shoes that offer good support are something you need to spend money on because they will prevent a lot of health problems in the future. Spend a little extra money on good shoes and save your back. Your future self will thank you. Scenario 6. You've been invited to the swankiest Christmas party in town, but the only suit you have is a white suit. Is this an emergency? While wearing white after Labor Day certainly is a fashion emergency, it is not a real emergency. Scenario 7. You're thousands of dollars in credit card debt. Should you use your emergency fund to pay it off? And what kind of centrist cuckoldry is this, you ask? Well, first, let me explain why credit card debt is an emergency. Assume you have $3,000 in your emergency fund, but you also have $3,000 in credit card debt. On the surface, these numbers seem equal. They are not. Let's say your credit card has a 17% APR, and your savings account has an annual yield of
0.01%.
Using
Math.
You can see why it doesn't make sense to carry a balance on your credit card just to protect your emergency fund. If you only make the minimum payment on your credit card, over a year, you'll owe an additional $510 in interest. Meanwhile, the money in your savings account will earn 3 dimes. Therefore, mathematically, it makes sense to use your emergency fund to pay off credit card debt. But you shouldn't use all of your emergency fund. This is one of those topics we have to approach with nuance. Yes, I'm angry too. If you spend everything you have to pay off credit card debt and then another emergency occurs, well,
You are
whether it's to pay your utility provider or the loan shark who will break your thumbs if you don't have her money by Friday, it's prudent to have some cash available. So, use your emergency fund to pay off credit card debt, but leave a minimum of $1,000 in your savings account, even if that means you can't.
Always pay your full monthly balance.
But I implore you, for your own sake, pay as much of your credit card bill as you can, and if you are in credit card debt, stop using your credit cards. Because as the great socialist thinker Marion Morrison said, life is hard. It's harder if you're stupid. I'm Comrade Rourke, and you are the revolution.
Produced in collaboration with Fort Collins Public Media. If you have any questions, comments, or death threats, please email us at communistfinance@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter at Comrade Rourke.